In this video, we're going to be talking about how to install a double track barn door system. That includes everything from a header board to the doors themselves to the rail system, the works. As always, I'll put timestamps in the video description below so you can go ahead and jump to whatever specific topic you're interested in learning about. But the main goal of this video is hopefully to keep you from making some of the mistakes that I've made when I've installed barn doors in the past. In this video, the particular brand hardware I will be using is Zekoo. You can find out on Amazon, and I'll put a picture somewhere over here of what that looks like. I am not sponsored by them at all, so this is not a sponsored video. I will say that the hardware kit itself was well constructed. The instruction manual left a little bit to the imagination, and this is something that I've ran into not only with their information, but with other barn door kits out there. It just seems to be a very common problem, whether you're installing a door by Zekoo or Winsoon or any of these groups that seem to be using the exact same instruction manual for their jobs. There's a lot left to the imagination when it comes to actually getting the work done. Meet your new best friend, the instruction manual. You'll laugh together, you'll cry together, and at some point you'll throw it away out of disgust. So the first thing I would recommend that you do is actually go ahead and install the hardware on your door. This just helps me visualize where the rail needs to go and other information like that. So the first thing I did was I went ahead and I attached my rollers. You can see here that I'm just measuring out a 1 inch from the side of the door, just as a point of reference. The instruction manual itself will tell you need 1 9/16 inches from the center of this hole to the top of the door. So there's a couple different ways you can do this. I am crazy enough to actually try to do it the way the instruction manual says. So you can see here, I'm just measuring that distance out and lining my bracket up accordingly. I'm using a triangle to make sure that that's actually straight up and down the bracket. I'm also clamping everything together. Now, I did go ahead and mark the hole, but you might choose to just go ahead and do what I'm doing here and not mark the hole and just go ahead and drill. For this particular bracket, I'm using a 1/2 inch drill bit to drill these holes, and that leaves the hole a little tight, so the bolt will go through, but you have to persuade it with a wrench. So that's all I'm doing here. And notice that you're going to attach your decorative bolts to the front of the door so that you can make sure that that, looks its best. So after that, I actually bought these handles separate. These are handles that do not require any sort of router or anything to have, a place for your hand to go to open the door. So all I've done is I've centered that up on the door, I've clamped it down, and now I'm going ahead and pre-drilling some holes so that I can come back later and actually hand tighten these with a screwdriver. So all I'm doing is going ahead and attaching this handle. You can see here I'm using some elbow grease to put these screws in these pre-drilled holes. And in just a minute, I'll remove the clamp and make sure that this is firmly attached. It is, and it gets the thumb of approval. To install the anti-jump guards, I'm just going to pre-drill 2 holes in the door on either side. And once I pre-drill those holes, I'm going to hand tighten those screws down and rotate the anti-jump guard out so I can actually hook the doors on the rail when the time comes. Now that we have everything attached to the doors, we're going to go ahead and mark our studs in the wall. And this is because we're attaching a header board for this door. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to reference back to the instruction manual. You can see here it's saying the door height plus 1 11/16 inches to the center line of the header board, right? So the challenge with that is that can be difficult to measure, difficult to visualize. So that's why I like to go ahead and actually attach the hardware to the door first, and then I go ahead and measure everything from that. So I also would suggest getting one of these little work platforms when you're hanging a barn door, because it saves you several trips up and down a ladder if you can just move from one end of the work platform to the other. This might be the point where you want to have a friend come help you, but you're going to want to make sure that that board that you need to attach for the header is level and that it's going to line up correctly with the rollers, right? So what I'm doing here and showing you with my finger is I'm showing where the approximate location of the rail would be when I install it, because you want to be able to pick that door up and set it on the rail. So after I've verified that that's the case and given it the thumbs up of approval, I'm going to go ahead and pre-drill my holes so we don't split the wood. And what you'll see here is on this header, I'm pre-drilling holes on the top and the bottom. And what that allows me to do is that leaves the center of the board open so that I can actually drill and put my lag bolts through that later. So I'm just going to go ahead and install some screws. once again, leaving the center of that board open for the lag bolts. What I've done is I've gone ahead and I've assembled one of the brackets to support that second rail, and I'm just visualizing here where that's going to need to go and where the header for that particular bracket is going to need to go. So I've just put that up against the wall. Now I'm going to take a measurement, and this measurement I'm showing is the measurement that I chose to the base of the header. I'm using 1x4x8 boards for my headers. And I'm just going to go ahead and from those measurements I took, put a 4-foot level up against the wall and trace a line so that I know where the base of my second header board needs to go, right? And sometimes this might be helpful to have, someone helping you so that this process goes a little bit quicker. That's totally up to you. If you want to do it the easy way or the hard way, like myself. But also, you can see here I've attached the second header board. We're just going to follow the same process of pre-drilling our holes and attaching our screws at the top and bottom of the header so that we leave the center of that header board open for the lag bolts that we'll install the rails with a little bit later. Now that we've installed the headers, we're going to go ahead and assemble the rail system. So we have 4 rail pieces here that will ultimately make 2 full rails, and we'll join them together with that hardware kit that I just showed. So this entire process is going to seem a lot harder in this video than it actually is, because I was filming this and trying to do this all with one hand. But essentially all you're going to do is go ahead and attach that bracket to these other 2 rail pieces by putting the bolt through it, putting a washer on it, and then tightening the nut on the other side. You can tighten that nut a couple of different ways. One way, of course, is using the Allen wrench that was provided, and you can get it pretty tight that way. But if you want to have a really tight connection, you'll need to take a pair of pliers and put it on the other side while you're using the Allen wrench to tighten that connection. At this point, you might want to go ahead and attach your door stops to your rail. You can loosen the door stops with that Allen wrench that's provided to actually let that slide onto your rail. And the reason why you might want to go ahead and do this now is because it's hard/impossible to slide the door stops over the bolts once the bolts have actually been installed to anchor this rail to the wall. Now that we've gotten to this point and assembled the rail, we're going to go ahead and attach the first rail to the wall. What we're going to do, and what I like to do, is actually take the assembled rail and hold it up against the wall and mark the bolt locations. This is where it's really beneficial to have a friend, because as you can see from this picture, the rail deflects at that point where it's joined together. So if you have a second person, that can really help you make sure you get those bolt locations correct. If you do not have someone that can help you, something you could do is create a template from paper or something like that, a really long sheet of paper, mark the bolt locations, and use that up on the wall to be able to drill them appropriately. So from there, we're going to go ahead and we're going to use our lag bolts to attach this rail to the wall. You can see that I have the spacer with the large end flush against the wall and the small end of the spacer flush against the rail. And we'll talk a little bit about that at the end of the video of why that's so important. You could use a drill at this point to go ahead and tighten your lag bolts, but once again, I like to do things the hard way, and I'm using a socket wrench. Remember, if you've not already done so, to go ahead and position your door stop, because if you don't do this in this step, you will not be able to get the door stop past the lag bolts. They will stop it from moving, as you can see I'm trying to show you in this image. But we have the first door actually on the rail, so progress, that's great. And you can see here I'm going to do a quick little test slide to make sure that it will roll, but also that it's not going to quote unquote stay open or stay closed. So using an assembled bracket, we're going to go ahead and mark the locations that we need to drill for these lag bolts for this second rail, right? So I draw your attention very closely to this image to show you, you cannot get a drill into the assembled bracket to be able to drill the holes. So you want to assemble a bracket to make sure you have it in the right spot, but you're going to want to have all the other brackets unassembled so that you can then make your marks and have them installed. So you can see here, I'm using the assembled bracket just to establish the placement of where that bracket needs to go. Drawing a line on the underside of it, as well as maybe marking some holes on the interior. And then I'm going ahead and using my triangle to line that bracket up so that it's straight. I drill my holes, and then I attach this part of the bracket with both sets of lag bolts and get that installed. Once that's installed, I can then install the down part of this bracket assembly. And you can see here, I'm just simply threading it on so that it is attached and it's good to go. What we're going to do now is go ahead and attach that second rail. So we're going to put that bolt through the spacer into that bracket we just installed, and then put the nut on the end and just tighten that up nice and snug so that rail is secured. Once again, public service reminder, make sure your door stops are attached, but that they're also tightened up so that they fit to the rail, so when your door hits it, it actually stops and doesn't just knock the door stop off with no problem. From there, we're going to go ahead, we're going to patch up our holes with some spackle. So I'm just going to take my finger, put the spackle into the hole, and then smooth it over with a knife. And you can see here the before and after, right? This is before we installed the closet doors. We have this nice, beautiful opening. And then we have these closet doors that really add just such a great look to the room, if I'm borrowing HGTV terminology. And here you have a profile view of what it looks like actually installed. I've ran into a couple of challenges when installing kits like this in the past when it comes to installing the rail up on the wall. So I want to go ahead and tell you and give you a heads up on two things in particular. One is you'll see that when you're joining the two rail pieces together, there's a bracket that you attach to it that has 4 screws that go into it, right? That bracket always needs to be facing the floor. It needs to be away from where the rollers are going to be passing over, because if that bracket is vertical, if the rollers are going to roll over that, your door is going to want to jump the track and get off, or it's not even going to want to roll over that to begin with. So you want to be careful when you're installing the rail to make sure that that bracket is turned down and that it's in line with the floor and not in line with the ceiling. Another thing I want to draw your attention to is the spacers themselves. So when you're going to install the spacers, you want to make sure that the large side, the large circle, is in contact with the wall, in contact with the header board, instead of being in contact with the rail itself. So what I ran into as well is that if you inverse that, if you put the small end in contact with the wall and the large end in contact with the rail, what you're going to find is really two things. One, when you're going to tighten up your bolts, you can actually like crush the wall, crush your header board a little bit if you're not careful. And that's just because your load is not being dispersed very well in that small area. The other piece, and this is really the one that is worse in my opinion, is if you have that large side flush against the rail, what's going to happen is when your rollers go to pass over it, they're not going to pass over it. They're either going to want to jump the track or they're just totally going to stop. So you want to make sure that that large side is actually parallel with the wall and not parallel with the rail. So you'll notice in this video that I did not install a base track for these doors to slide along. What I found with this dual track system is that it actually worked pretty well without having to do that. If you did want to install a track in your particular application, the kit itself that I'm using, the Zekoo kit, came with some of the slides that you can use either if you've routed out the middle, if you've taken a router and actually cut a notch along the length of the door, or if you want to just make them like this and have the door pass through them. It does come with some of those guides to be able to help guide that door and opening and closing. What I found though is that there is a roller type guide, and I'll put a picture of that on the screen somewhere over here, but there's actually a roller type guide that I like better and I've used for other installs. And I really like that better because it's more durable and it's not as likely to break. I've actually installed some of these plastic guides that have come with the barn doors before. And yes, it was in a room where children play regularly, and those guides might have snapped. So all that to say, I much prefer, I like talking, but I much prefer the rollers themselves instead of the actual plastic guides. I don't want to scare anyone off from doing this project, but what I will tell you is that barn doors can be very tricky. One of the very first barn doors that I ever hung was for a bathroom. And with this bathroom barn door, it would always slide shut, right? So that meant that the door was always blocking off the bathroom entrance. You would open it and then it would close on its own, right? And for a bathroom, that's kind of cool. And I kind of chalked that up to it being a design feature to make sure that the door was always closed if you were in the bathroom, right? But ultimately, because I had misdrilled along the way, the door was always going to slide closed. And if I had tried to fix it, what would have happened is that I would have had to widen the holes out that I made into the door itself. and that might have done more harm than good. So I tell you all this to say, be very careful when you're doing this work. Go ahead and double and triple check all your measurements before you cut or drill anything, and take your time. Make sure you're in the right headspace. Don't go into this when you're mad at work or mad at your dog or whatever. Take your time and make sure that you're thinking things through, and just pay attention to what you're doing to hopefully minimize any sort of problems you might have. So thanks for watching the video, and if there's anything that you would have done differently, if there's anything you would like to have answered, go ahead and place that in the comments. And if I don't answer the comment, I'm sure that someone else that has watched the video will be happy to chime in. All that to say, thanks for watching, and good luck hanging your barn door.